The following content is for information and entertainment purposes only. The opinions expressed in this episode are those of the participants and do not represent the views of any third-party entities. Hello and welcome to another installment of the Flexibility Focus Minisode series, a companion show to the main podcast in which I interview some of the brightest minds and most competent instructors in the health and fitness industry. Today's minisode features Charlotte Tooth, a former dancer turned personal trainer based in London. Those of you who have already listened to episode 2 of the main podcast will remember Charlotte's name from the Spotlight segment of that episode. In this minisode, Charlotte and I discuss the gap between traditional dance and sports science, hypermobility, female perspectives of the fitness industry, how to improve your presentation skills, and loads more. Please bear in mind that I was experiencing issues with my internet connection during the recording of the minisode, so there will be one or two moments where the audio seems to jump, but it isn't to a level where you miss anything. Charlotte did kindly offer to re-record the interview, but I feel the issues we had with the connection were not bad enough to warrant doing that. The final product is still gold, and Charlotte gives some fantastic answers that I'd be afraid you would miss out if we did go ahead and re-record our talk. So, apologies for the few minor blips caused by the internet connection, but that's technology for you, and I'm sure you'll still get a lot out of this installment. As always, please rate and leave a comment if you can, and if you like what I'm doing with the podcast, please share it with your friends. A new full episode of the main podcast will be dropping very soon, probably sometime over the weekend, so keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy my interview with Charlotte. So, Charlotte, I always start these out by asking you to tell the audience about you and your background and how you got involved in health and fitness training. So if you can start there, that would be great.
So I was always into sports and movement as a kid. I was the kid that I used to skip lunchtime and just go to every sports session that I could. I even convinced them to let me into the boys basketball team. I was like, I can be a boy and I can play basketball. So every lunchtime I was playing sports, every evening when I could, and I was obsessed with dance. I tried to go to dance lessons when I was younger, but financially it just wasn't happening. With my parents, so I just kept kind of copying what I saw on TV and watching movement. And then eventually I got to about age 17, and I was deciding whether to do A levels, what to do with my life, where I wanted to go. And I eventually decided to do, because I wanted to study mathematics originally. I was very into it, so I took that as A level. I was going to take that further forward, and then once I'd started my A levels, I had a huge meltdown and thought, what am I doing? I need to dance for a living. And I didn't have any formal training. I just entered like talent contests and whatnot, and I'd done all right for saying that I didn't do any lessons or anything. I just copied movement. And yeah, so I walked up to a dance school in Burton-on-Trent and said to this lady, I said, I want to be in the Royal Ballet. And she didn't laugh at me, but it was a little bit awkward, in that she had to kind of slowly let me down and be like, just so you know, you would have had to do that from a very young age. You know, it's probably better to aim for musical theatre. And yeah, so she trained me up in 2 years, and I got into London Studio Centre, which is it's a dance college, but musical theatre, so you do singing and acting as well. And then from London Studio Centre, I left and ended up becoming a professional dancer and PT. But yeah, movement was always part of my life. It was just something that I really enjoyed, and I noticed perked me up and made me feel fantastic. So yeah, easy transition into it.
Yeah. What kind of dance style was it you did then? You obviously you mentioned musical theatre. Was it a particular type of discipline that you trained in, or was it kind of like a broad spectrum approach to dance?
A lot of the colleges that are not like just ballet particular. So the college I went to is classed as musical theatre college. So you heavily focus on ballet because that's considered the most important of all of them. So it was ballet every morning and point lessons and things like that. But then we also trained in different styles of jazz. We did like tap, which I really enjoyed, partnering, salsa. But it's just like university, you know, how you guys got to choose your topics and you get to choose what you want to specialize in. We had that as well. So you could always choose what to go into. And then, yeah, on top of all the different dance styles, you would do singing and acting as well. So voice work too. But yeah, I specialized. I mean, the thing that I spent most of my time doing and I loved was ballet and jazz. I just love the way the body moved and how we could do it, use it for different dynamics as well. So,
Yeah, fantastic. Looking at the kind of stuff that you're putting out and looking on your website, I've seen that you've created something called the Method, which from looking at it, it appears to bridge the gap between dance and science. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, about the Method?
Yes, it's very new, and it's kind of an amalgamation of everything I've kind of learned over the years as a dancer and as a trainer. When I first entered the fitness industry, I was teaching every class you could imagine. You tend to go to studios and they ask you to teach like, oh, you need to teach HIIT, you need to teach kettlebells, you need to teach, all sorts. So I kind of took all the good bits, what I thought were the good bits, and put them all together into this session. And it's if you wanted something to compare it to, it's a mix of ballet. It's a mix of traditional bar, which is not the same as ballet. It's like ballet, but kind of redefined. It's got bits of Pilates in, actual bits of dance, so like dance movements too that you learn when you're doing like traditional jazz, like mathematics or like fussy things like that. And then it also incorporates strength work. So I wanted to take some of the science from the personal training world, like adaptation, progressive overload, joint angles, joint tension, things like that, and put it all together into one lovely class. And it's very feel good. A lot of people have said when they come out, they feel very connected to their body. The way I cue it is that I want them to understand what they're feeling and say, do you feel this here? If you don't, try this. If you still don't feel it, try shifting your weight here and here. And it's very much good for body mapping, mind to body awareness as well.
Fantastic. No, that's great. And my experience with dance is limited to like treating and coaching dancers who have had injuries, and in my experience, I think that the dance world still has a long way to go to catch up with the science of sport and exercise physiology. Do you feel the same way, or what are your thoughts on the current state of science in dance?
Yeah, I think if you'd asked me that question like 10 years ago, I would have been like, what is he talking about, this science and injury and things like this, because I was a hungry beaver ready to go and I just wanted to whack my leg around my head and perform for anyone that wanted to see it. But I think now that I know what I know, and I do go into colleges and do workshops, I think there's a really tough juxtaposition, because I've been a choreographer as well. Like I know how it is to just want to get whatever is in your head, like visually, story-wise, onto a person's body. And the last thing you're thinking about is that internal rotation appropriate in that position whilst you're hinging and doing this and this? And it's just not anything that ever comes up into a choreographer's mind. And if you think about it also, I don't know whether this is the same now in dance colleges, but previously what I've experienced in my college and when I did go back for the first few years to do workshops, is that a lot of the teachers are there because they were great performers, like they did a big show. They didn't necessarily study anatomy, physiology, the human body, Pilates, anything like that. So you're being taught by someone who is an amazing performer and can really charm you in the way they move. But do they know anything about the human body? That is sometimes questionable. And it's often presented at dance colleges that you have the teachers that are the incredible performers, and on the other side you have what we used to consider boring Pilates and remedial stuff, and it's very little crossover. And the importance of that crossover was never ever made clear to us either. So whenever I get young dancers come to my classes, I'm like, right, I have a project here. But yeah, I think there's a huge amount of work to be done there, particularly with young dancers and education. But it sounds like people like you are jumping in and taking that on its head and trying to make a difference, which is fantastic. I try and do it with as many dancers as I see, but it's tough because the dance market is saturated. There's so many of us, and how can we reach out and get the information to all of them? It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something I can attest to, because when I got invited over to like ballet companies in Europe, it tended to be the physio team who were inviting me over, and I faced a lot of resistance from choreographers. And this isn't to insult choreographers at all, it's just different perspectives. And what I found was that they had an almost obsessive pursuit of posture and technique that conformed more to the aesthetics of dance rather than the dancer's body itself. And it's like sports training. You'll have coaches who are almost religious about the form of an exercise, and they try to force an athlete or client's body to fit the shape of that exercise, and so we get injury as a result. And I guess you kind of answered the question already, but I was going to ask, do you think that's something that you would have agreed with, and do you think maybe it's time that choreographers start to move away from like the traditional movement form that's been there for centuries, and maybe change the physical vocabulary of dance so that it's kinder to the dancer's long-term health?
Yeah, I mean that's a big project, right? So you've got to educate the dancers, you've got to educate the choreographers, you've got to get in there with all the dance schools and be like, hey, is this actually good for long-term health, or are we creating disposable dancers that can only dance for 4 or 5 years because they are broken? But yeah, I think it is time for change. I think there are a few people out there doing it. Like there's a lot of choreographers I've worked with that will they'll base the movements on what the dancer's already good at, and they won't necessarily be like, this is the movement, like we'll change kick, drop, split. They'll be like, okay, give me a movement that represents excitement or that represents sadness, and you'll work a bit more in the contemporary style, and then the dancer will do as a process what is more natural to their body, and then the choreographer will work with it and say a bit more of this or a bit more of this to bring across the story. So people like Matthew Bourne, for example, his choreographic process is very different to other people's, and he does very much like that. But this is a huge job, and yes, I do agree there needs to be change. But how we do it and how we create a team that's big enough to make a change is quite a big thing. But I think you're already starting that change.
Podcast, is it?
No. But if anyone's got any great ideas, then
send them in.
But it's not very often that, like, dancers, like a lot of dancers, they will work as a dancer, and then they'll get injured, and then they'll consider themselves a failure. They won't consider the system a failure, because we are trained to think that if we can't do it, we're not great. If you can't stand on one leg and have the other leg in the air in this position, this angle, you're not great. And they don't go, oh, I wonder scientifically if my hip socket is this, and this. It's just not something we think.
Exactly. And one thing that shocked people when I went over to to Berlin and was working with a company there, even though they had a physio, the physio's job really was to fix the dancers when they broke. And so I said to them, what kind of assessment process do you have? How do you test their joint structure, their tendon strength, their joint integrity? And they're like, what are you talking about? And so we had one dancer. She was from the corps de ballet, and she was struggling with what was the movement now? It's is it called an arabesque? Is it where the
one behind?
Exactly. Yeah. And she was struggling with that, and it turned out she had the structure of her hips basically didn't allow it, and so she'd injured herself. She tried to get the technique down to what the choreographer wanted, but she was unable to, because bone was just getting in the way. The structure of her joints wouldn't allow it. And so I said, look, she's never going to be able to do this, not without surgery. And that was an issue I found, was that as well, by doing these assessments, these joint assessments, you'd find that dancers were naturally hypermobile. And so there were no strategies in place to deal with the hypermobility. In your practice, do you ever encounter clients who are hypermobile, and what are some of these strategies that you use to improve strength and joint stability?
So I think with the people that I experience that are hypermobile clients, like we call them normal, dancers call people that are not dancers normal people. Yeah. So just excuse that analogy. It's just meant as not dancers. So for non-dancers, oftentimes they don't realize they're hypermobile. They'd just be like, oh, that's just the way I move. So it's just about education. And then for the ones that are dancers, it's quite funny, because when we were at college, the people that were hypermobile were seen as like blessed by the gods of dance, like, oh wow, she's hypermobile, look at her lines, like her arabesque. Like, because when you're hypermobile, obviously you're a lot of the time, like for example, your knee joint will go past its normal range, so when you do an arabesque, it will look stunning, it will look amazing,
Yeah.
because your joints are just going past their normal range, which is fine. But so yeah, the problem was that we all thought that those people were the gods of dance, and so those hypermobile people then took on the character of being hypermobile, and they were like, right, becoming these sort of like floppy, rubbery people. So people that I experience, particularly dancers, it's education. Like, do you need to take on the sorry, I think my internet just dropped out a little bit there. Is that,
Yeah,
can you hear me okay?
it just froze about 10 seconds ago. Yeah.
Oh no, sorry about that. Yeah,
It's
good old
fine.
internet challenging us. So yeah, I think with the dancers that I encounter, it's education. Like, just check yourself. Like, make sure you are as strong as you are mobile. Awareness, working on balance between different muscles, and really just learn to strengthen all ranges. Don't just be this person that can throw your legs around but not be able to, like, yes, you can do dynamic kicks, but can you développé your leg up there? Can you hold it there with the strength of your muscles? Because we want those ranges, passive, active ranges, to be as synonymous as we can. But the sequence I always use with them is testing their awareness, like with mirrors, testing their awareness without mirrors. Like, is what you're thinking, what are you thinking in your brain is happening with your joints, and is it actually happening as you see it? And then obviously just loading it and playing around with instability then. So a lot of them I'll put on like the TRX suspension trainer, which is great because it's it's a very humbling piece of kit. If you use it too much, you will fall on your ass, and if you don't use it enough, then you're not getting the exercise. So it's a great piece of kit, but it's not the first thing I go to. Always is awareness first.
Yeah. And just speaking of the TRX, for people who might be watching or listening, can you just expand on what the TRX is and maybe what some of the benefits are compared to, say, regular weightlifting?
Yeah, so first things first, I work for TRX, so I'll put that out there for anyone's like, oh, she's shouting out TRX, but I don't have to say anything about it. I just really love it myself in my own training. So it's a suspension trainer, and it's 2 long straps that are anchored by a single anchor point, which creates a sort of 3D range of motion. And these straps are adjustable, so they can go higher or lower, which gives access to ground-based exercises and different angles. So it's just basically different ways to load the body and use gravity for challenging the body. But the nice thing about the straps, in particular with what we were speaking about, which is hypermobile clients, is that they create this instability and this need for all core all the time, we call it, which is constantly being engaged through the midsection so that your extremities are able to do what they want to do. Because the straps will literally make you fall on your ass, like I said before. It's one of those things where there's just enough stability to allow you to do what you need to do on it, but there's just enough instability for you to not be taking advantage of the straps or using them as a crutch. But they're fantastic. You can put your hands in, you can put your feet in, and in terms of resistance training, it's very stimulating for the muscles, because normal weight training, you have certain linear ways of moving, whereas with the straps, you're moving in a very 3D fashion, and there's a lot more variables within the movement. So your body just asks for a little bit more.
And I'm probably completely wrong here, but for people who might be listening and thinking that the TRX is just some fancy piece of kit for dancers, was it invented by a Navy SEAL, the TRX?
Yes, yeah. So it's invented by Randy Hetrick, and he was a Navy SEAL, and he literally just invented it purely because they were on their missions, and he was freaking out about being strong enough to, scale these big ships and making sure that he had good pull mechanisms whilst trying to not die, and carry his kit on his back. So yeah, he literally, the first TRX was literally a jiu-jitsu belt and a bit of parachute webbing, which is really cool, which is so cool. But it's such a good piece of kit for anyone. I mean, it's the one thing that I use, like today I wasn't feeling inspired to work out at all, and it's the one thing that I can do each day, which is it's supportive enough, but it's also challenging enough. So it's a very great way to progress and regress.
Fantastic. No, I think that's great. Nice little bit of history there for TRX. So you've obviously established yourself as a leading personal trainer in what is a very male-dominated industry, but could you tell us about some of the challenges that you've faced as a woman in a male dominated industry?
Yes. Well, I think that there's a couple of worlds that I've been in. The Pilates world, I've not had such a problem. That's a bit more female based. And the bar world has also not been such a problem. But I think when I have taught in studios where it's mostly PT and group classes led by sort of men, it can be a bit challenging to be taken seriously. Whether that was a male thing, whether that was something that came down from the top, I don't know, but it's really tough to be taken seriously sometimes in that sort of setting. So dealing with a lot of egos, a hostile environment. I mean, this happens in male and female dominated industries, but I think particularly with young male PTs, there's a sense of needing to prove yourself or to have the biggest muscles in the room or to know the most. But I'm a very empathetic person, and I saw straight through that. So the minute someone tries to do that with me, I don't try to rise to the challenge. I just see it as what it is and notice there's a person behind that ego, obviously struggling with something. So that's kind of how I got out of it. I just started to be empathetic and understand this is what this person's going through. They're feeling a bit stressed about being in a room full of 10 other men, and they're probably feeling a bit underconfident. So I just offered support and kindness, and it actually got me through the whole way up until this point now. But yeah, it gave me skills that I didn't have before. Like having to work with a lot of egos really helped me hone in on my like people skills.
That's a great answer. It's that famous quote, isn't it? Lead with light, I think is the quote. But yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. Do you have any advice for other women who are looking to become a personal trainer, or they might already be a personal trainer but looking to take that business, the business one step further and gain a bit more engagement, a bit more following?
Yeah, I think I mean, this advice probably would stand for anyone, so even men in the industry. But I think particularly women, just stay focused. Don't be put off by setbacks, because there will be setbacks. I think always be a student. Like it's, I mean, I'm talking generally here, so please, all the male PTs in the world, don't bash me after this. But I think a lot of young male PTs like to think that they go on one course and they know it all, and it's one of those things where you should always be a student and always be humble. Like it's always the loudest person in the room that knows the least, right? So be that quiet, humble person that educates yourself, that does the research and that works hard, and that will get you much further than shouting and saying you're the best and that you know the most. But yeah, be yourself, stand your ground, and have confidence but not arrogance.
Very good advice. Yeah, I think it's a trap that some of us are guilty of sometimes. No, it is great advice. So at the moment, you're doing a lot of online coaching. How have you found the transition from in-person coaching to online coaching? Has it been easy, or has it been quite challenging? How have you found it?
Do you know, I have mixed feelings about it. It's a funny one. I've really enjoyed it. I've never sat still for so long. This is, I mean, anyone that knows me knows that I'm like a little buzzy bee, and I'm flying around London to different people's houses. I've got like kettlebells and whatnot in my bag, and then going to this studio, that studio. So the stillness has been lovely for my body, just to rest a little bit as well. But I think in terms of like client experience, it's been great. I mean, I'm quite lucky in that I have a background in Pilates, which makes the cueing very easy. Pilates, I recommend for anyone who wants to be a personal trainer. I think it should be part of the personal training curriculum, because your cueing ends up being so fantastic that people understand you, even if the internet connection cuts out a little bit, or even if your screen is freezing. Like, you wouldn't need to demo if you can cue that well. I also have a background in like working on screen as well, so like dance on screen. So I can tell clients, my clients all know now it's profile left, profile right, face the camera, or on the diagonal. And and they know this as well, because I've just taken it from my experience. Like, how did I used to work when I was doing screen assessments and things like that? But yeah, I actually really enjoy it. The sessions are very efficient. I was very lucky. I was teaching clients that I already had, and they all stayed very loyal and decided to stick with me. Some of them doing a lot more sessions as well. They're like, I've got the time. Let's do 4 sessions a week now.
Yeah.
So I know they're all, I mean, all my clients are fitter and stronger than they've ever been on lockdown. It's crazy.
Amazing.
But I do miss people. I really miss people. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure you're the same. Sitting in your room and chatting to your houseplants is not quite the same as chatting to a person. And you know, I love reading people. I love helping people get motivated and figuring people out, and that's much harder on the camera.
Yeah.
So yeah, when we get back to normal life, I'll really appreciate seeing like a face in front of me.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree, because I think even though online coaching is here to stay in a much bigger capacity than it was before lockdown, I think that the in-person experience can never go away, because training and coaching is very much a person-to-person experience. So, but no, I'm looking forward to it as well, trust me. And I think you've kind of answered this next question in a way, because I've observed your sessions before, and something that's very noticeable about your coaching is that your presentation skills are at another level. You know, you're eloquent, confident, and like you said, your cueing and instructions are crystal clear. So, do you have any advice for trainers who may be lacking in that area and how they can work on the presentation skills? You've already mentioned Pilates. Is there any other tips you might give?
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest here. I was not always the best presenter. For anyone that knows where I originally come from, I come from Burton-on-Trent, and in Burton-on-Trent, we all speak through our noses. So I moved to London genuinely like, all right, Doc, all right, should we go and train now? Oh yeah, go on, put your leg up there. And very quickly I learned that I wasn't going to be taken seriously. So I think in terms of presentation skills, like I was kind of lucky because I went through stage school. I did voice lessons, I did acting lessons, I did, you know, Lambda drama certification, where you have to know how to speak in RP and things like that. And I did thousands of hours of teaching. Like I was not great once upon a time. Like I used to freak out before I taught every single class. Like I'd be like, oh, I'm not good enough. They're not gonna be able to understand me. I won't remember the choreography. Because when I first started teaching, it was always, I was teaching bar originally. So it was very intricate choreography, and people love variety in bar. They love like hip shakes this way, arm up this way. So it was like a dance routine that you had to remember, demonstrate, and be able to you know, announce it to the class. So I think my advice would be to teach as many hours as you can. Record your own voice and listen back to it. You'll start to hear what you do often. I think my thing is or like, I always say like. So you'll catch up on the things that you do a lot, and just record yourself like telling a story, or just I don't know, record yourself speaking about your day. And it's just a really nice way to assess yourself.
Yeah.
If you have an accent, just be aware of it. Don't get rid of it, but just be aware of it. I was made very aware of mine. I had a very sharp Italian lady in one of my first lessons, and she came up to me at the end and she's like, I did not understand a word you said, but your class was good. I was like, what? And it was at the time when I hadn't really refined my non-Burtonian accent. So just be aware of your accent and how it can affect people. Like I was teaching classes with like, you know, 6 different nationalities, and like people from New York, Australia, Italy, things like that. So I had to be really clear on the microphone, and I was very thankful at that point that I'd had voice training to control my breath as well, because we used to have microphones that were right next to your mouth. So if you were a gasper, you had problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, always ask for feedback as well. Like whatever you present, like I literally have never taught a single class without saying at the end, if you have any questions, any feedback, please tell me. I would love to know. And then put on a smile, and they feel confident to come to you and say it. But yeah, just do as much as you can. Like don't be the person that doesn't do the thing because you're scared of the thing. Like do the thing, be uncomfortable, speak about topics that you're not at all comfortable with, and yeah, just deep dive into discomfort, and you will have a great time and will be a fantastic presenter.
Yeah, very sage advice. I like that. Yeah, I remember when I listened back to my very first podcast episode, I was like, who is that? That's not my voice. I don't sound like that. And I did an interview with a couple of guys from Ireland who've got a taekwondo podcast. Watching it back, I'm like, I say a lot. Every other word, like, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I might need to work
Yeah.
on that. Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it? Listening back, you hear it so much, don't you? You're like, oh, why do I say that? But it's our brain and our body is such funny things that we can't process what we're saying whilst we're saying it because it's happening real time. So I mean, unless you're incredibly intelligent, you can predict exactly every single word. There's going to be some humanisms in there, like I get it. Oh, yay. All these things happen.
Absolutely. And I think it's good to have a few of those in there anyway. I think if your presentation is almost too polished, it comes across as a bit artificial and it might turn some people off. I've certainly found that
Yeah.
anyway.
Like a Tony Robbins.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Every word is pitch perfect, like he's said it 1,000
that,
times, which he
that
probably
guy's
has.
practiced, Yeah. It's there, just So when I was a personal trainer, something that I was admittedly very ignorant of was how the female menstrual cycle can affect training and progress. So if you can just offer some female perspective here, what are some of the things that male trainers should consider when they're coaching female clients? And is there any advice you could give to female members of the audience to help them cope with their cycle when they're exercising?
I think for this one, particularly for male trainers, I get why they don't always know a lot about it. It's sometimes an awkward thing to be like, there's this thing happening that I kind of don't know about, but I find it really awkward to speak about, and they just don't want to learn about it, which is fine. But I think it's a lot more palatable if you just do the research and read up on it, rather than asking your clients. But I think the main thing that guys struggle with is a lack of understanding of how the hormones can affect the female body. If you don't have a period, you don't have a menstrual cycle, why would you think about it? It's I understand completely, but I think just for guys that know nothing about it, just understand there are different phases within the cycle which can affect how a person feels in terms of their mood, depression, anxiety, adherence to exercise, like wanting to actually do anything. These phases can also affect the stability of the joints, and ability to produce power and things like that, because there's certain hormones that are coming up and coming down with different parts of the phases, and they will affect all of these. I think also the psychology side of it, like somebody might feel more self-conscious, about bending over to pick up a bar, things like that. So you just got to have your human skills on point. I swear, like, it's literally just my human skills that have got me to this point that I am in my career, because just knowing how to read people and to be empathetic and understand people is very powerful. But I think just know that the physiology between male and females is different, and ours changes so much throughout the cycle. So just do your research. I mean, don't go in there on your first session with your client and be like, hey, when's your next period? Just right, just be aware of it, and know that if you're asking that client to be in a calorie deficit that week, like, is it the right week to be doing that? Like, certain parts of the cycle, that client is going to feel hungrier, they're going to feel like they need more calories, and they'll be burning more calories as well. If you're doing measurements, I don't know if people still do measurements, when you're doing pinching, like, water retention is higher at certain parts of the cycle as well. So, like, don't compare the physiology of week 1 to week 3 or week 2 to week 4. Like, it's different each week, and it's better to keep some consistency in, like, what you're asking that client to do when you know how the cycle affects them. And every single person is different. I had a friend on the phone yesterday who said, mate, I am keeled over. I cannot get out of a C curve because my cramps are that bad. She couldn't move. And this is so different from female to female. So have a lovely enough presence that someone feels like they can say to you, this is the problem that I have today, and this is how I think it will affect my training. Because if you're an open person, then the client will feed it to you and they'll tell you.
Yeah, that's very sage advice. Yeah, really good. Thank you for that. That's brilliant. Something as well that I didn't really have a lot of experience with as a personal trainer was clients who were pre and postnatal. because I think it's one of those things as from a male perspective, it's like, oh, I'm out of my depth here, and maybe the ego gets in the way, and I don't want to take on clients like that. What would you say are some of the important considerations that trainers need to think about when they're dealing with clients who are pre and postnatal?
So I think obviously the most important thing is knowing that the client is safe. Like, effectively, this is a completely natural thing. It happens to most people, and your job is just to keep the client and the baby safe. And I think what happens is people see prenatal, postnatal, and they think that there's all this mystical magic happening that they just have no idea about. And it's actually mostly quite simple for a lot of people. So I think the first thing is just every client is different. Listen to the client, note, like, check that they've got their doctor's note, like actually be in contact with their doctor or their physio or their, like, whoever is giving them appointments, and check, you know, is there anything I should know about? Is there anything that you think would affect their training? Reach out to the people that know a lot about their body and are working from the inside out. Listen to the client as well. The hormones that we produce when we are pregnant will heighten our sense of what is right and what is wrong in our body, our sort of intuition. So listen to the client, and if they're saying something doesn't feel right, obviously don't do it. And don't, if a client comes to you and she's, you know, 3 months pregnant and says, I want to start a massive strength training program and get all the gains in the next few months, like, guide them in a way that shows them that you're not going to make massive gains during pregnancy. It's a maintenance phase. It's not a let's build and build and build and push the body to its extremities, because that's not the time for the body to do it. There's so many great other times to do it in your life, and pregnancy is not that time. This does not mean you sit on the sofa with a box of Pringles and just chill out and do nothing, of course, but like, it's important that the body is strong enough for childbirth. But I think that but yeah, it's keeping the client moving, keeping them safe, but not asking for nothing or everything.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And that was something I never really considered, was considering pregnancy as more like a maintenance phase rather than, you know, a time to develop. And again, that point about making sure the body is strong enough for pregnancy, I think that'll go a long way to stopping a lot of the postnatal issues, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, that's great. So obviously you and I know each other through social media. Do you, in your opinion, do you think that social media is doing enough of the right things to represent women in the health and fitness industry, or do you still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done?
I mean, my answer might be slightly skewed because of my experience, but I think that we all have our responsibility to represent ourselves in the way that we want. So, I mean, when I think of social media, I generally think of Instagram because that's where I am most active. But I think what I see is some female trainers particularly feel the need to present themselves, you know, half naked, or try to match up to all of the other videos that they're seeing, like 5-minute booty blast or quick hit, and things that are kind of like trends. I think it's less of like, what is social media doing for us and what we can do for social media. Like, how can we represent ourselves in an authentic light? How can we give information that's useful, that's backed by science, but also by an understanding of training and psychology. But yeah, how can you get across to other people what you want to be and what you want the information out there to be as well. But it's hard to say, because does social media do it for us, or do we do it for them? That is the question. This kind of these trends that appear on social media, or is it social media that creates the algorithms that support, you know, 5-minute booty blast videos?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. Is it kind of like a chicken or egg situation, isn't it? You know, a lot to think about. But again, great answer. So the last question is always the fun one, because we've had quite a bit of a heavy talk there. If you were stranded
heavy talk, tea time.
yeah. Cheers. If you were stranded on a desert island and you could only take one book, one piece of gym equipment, and one food or drink item, what would you take with you?
Oh, okay. It's hard with books because it's like, are you that person that's like very like, oh, I'm going to stay alive on this desert island, or are you just gonna have a great time?
Hmm.
So I think for me, it's quite geeky, but it's, you know, I love the anatomy coloring book because it's the perfect mix of mindful activity but
Hmm.
also learning as well. So that would be, I think that would be my book because it would keep my brain active but also something mindful. There's another book called Spark by John Ratty, which is great because it every time I read it, it just makes me want to work out. It makes me want to stay strong
Yeah.
and you know, live to 200.
Yeah.
And then in terms of, you read that one, have you?
Yeah, it's a great book. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, highly recommend it.
Such a good book. Yeah, it's so good. I give it to all clients that are in that phase of, oh, everything's hard. I'm not sure if I want to do this. I'm like, read Spark. And they're all like, yes, let's go for it.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
Yeah.
I always give them that one and combine it with Atomic Habits, which is another great book. And if a combination with those, you know, people overcome some really challenging obstacles. But yeah, no, I love Spark. It's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah, so I got it on Audible, and the Audible speaker is great as well. I think he's got like a twangy American accent, so it goes in really, really well.
Yeah.
It's stuck in my brain.
Yeah.
Piece of gym kit, completely unbiased, unsponsored, would definitely be a suspension trainer from TRX. It is enjoyable, it's fun, I dance with it. It's like my dance partner, and you can just do everything with it, everything you need. And I'd probably use it to climb trees if something crazy was chasing me as well.
Right. Like that, yeah.
And then, and then food would probably dark chocolate. It's literally my only obsession. I have a tiny bit every single day, absolutely obsessed. And when I don't have it, the world has ended, and I'm not a nice person. So, bit of an addiction going on there. I'm not going to be honest, but yeah, dark chocolate.
Fantastic. No, they're great answers. Before we finish, could you just tell the audience where they can find you on social media and online?
Yeah, so my website, which I just launched, so yeah, have a little look at that. It's www.charlottetooth.co.uk, and tooth like in your mouth. And then my Instagram is Charlotte_tooth. You'll know it's me because there's a cheesy picture
Yeah.
smiling. So yeah, there's a couple of Charlotte tooths, but mine's the one with the cheesiest photo.
That's it. Full of life. That's the way it should be. Charlotte, you've been amazing. Honestly, you've been a fantastic guest. You've given some great answers. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate that.
Thank you for time, and thank you for the preparation and the questions. They were so well thought through, and it was really, really
Yeah.
nice to chat with you.
No, it's been great to have you on. Thank you. I'll see you later.
Thanks.
Oh,